often when you're in familiar surroundings, you tend not to really look. You don't see. You're kind of just, your mind is somewhere else. But when I'm traveling in these countries, I'm very much in the moment. I'm very much there experiencing what's around me, the smells and what the things look like, and the people in the street and how they're dressed. You know, I become very acutely aware of all these things, and your senses are kind of heightened in some way. Hopefully people can, in some of my pictures, can see a common humanity. That, yeah, maybe the person is from Yemen or Cambodia or Mozambique, but yet we're all kind of the same. We all are human. We all have the same hopes and dreams, and we all have the same. We all want respect. We all want to be loved. I think the picture is more about the content and the story, perhaps, the face, something we can learn or appreciate about a place or a person, and less about something that shows what great artists we are and how clever we are. It's not that I'm looking for the right light or the right colors. What I'm often doing is looking to avoid light which I find unappealing, or colors which I find awkward and that don't have harmony and don't have flow. It takes a while to get inside of a culture or a place or a situation. Then when you first arrive, you're a bit cold. You don't really see possibilities, or perhaps things seem a bit difficult. So it's a little scary in the beginning for me to get to a place and, you know, wondering how am I going to sort this out. I think we as photographers are capable of making a positive contribution to the world that we live in. I think we can help people understand problems and maybe bring about some kind of positive change. For myself, I think if I can bring some small understanding of the culture, the planet, bring people maybe a little bit closer together, that would be about as much as I think I would hope for or expect. place like Afghanistan, I followed that story for so many years. It's fascinating for me to go back and see the changes and see how the situation has evolved. I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I lived there for most of my life. I had many cameras kind of growing up, but I only really got kind of very interested in photography when I was in college. My father was an electrical engineer, but he also had a very keen interest in photography. When I was in college, I took a class in fine art photography. And almost at the same time, I started working for the college newspaper. So I sort of had one foot in the world of kind of photojournalism and another foot kind of in the art photography, world. I think when I started working on this newspaper in Philadelphia, my real objective, my real goal was to travel the world. After about 2 years working on this newspaper, I got a bit bored. It became very repetitive. The assignments weren't that interesting. So I saved some money and literally bought a one-way ticket to India. I was only going to stay there for about 6 weeks, and I was going to try and develop some picture stories. And that 6 weeks turned into 2 years. I didn't come back for 2 years. I just stayed there. There's not much history of travel in my family, so it's a bit odd that suddenly I've become this sort of nomad where I end up spending the last almost 30 years traveling around the world. But I'm very curious. I'm fascinated with other cultures. I'm fascinated with just the world, and I think that travel and seeing the world and experiencing the planet that we live on is maybe one of the most important things we can do. I mean, we're here for such a short time in this world, and it seems that one of the most interesting, the most worthwhile things you can do is actually see the world. In 1979, I went to Pakistan, sort of just on a whim. I had been traveling in India for over a year. While I was there, I was in this very small, cheap, $2 a night hotel room, and I ran into some Afghan refugees, and they invited to take me in and show me this civil war. They were very interested in the world knowing about what was happening. At the time, the Afghan army was burning and destroying villages all over this particular part of Afghanistan. I dressed up in a local shalwar kameez and literally walked across the border right next to some border security soldiers who thought I was an Afghan. So we walked around from village to village. I mean, up and down these mountains. I thought I was going to die. It was so strenuous. I mean, literally we would get up sometimes before dawn and walk up and down these mountains all day until very late in the afternoon. They just knew that I was somebody who could potentially get their story out to the world. During that same period, when I was in India trying to get my film back to New York, I I actually mailed some of my film back, which is kind of almost unheard of today. And that film, when I got back to the States, it ended up on page 1 of the New York Times. In some ways, it's just sort of a critical mass that develops. You work, and eventually that work accumulates, and I think it amounts to something. And in my case, I think that if I hadn't happened to Afghanistan, would have been something else at some other point in time, because I was absolutely determined not to go back and work on that newspaper again. Had come back from Tibet on September the 10th after finishing an assignment. Went to bed almost immediately. I kind of unpacked my bag, and it had been a long flight. I'd flown in from like Hong Kong or something. Woke up the next morning on September the 11th, and I actually looked out the window, and you could see the World Trade Center on fire. And so immediately I grabbed my camera bag and raced up on the roof of the building. I think we were all overcome with this state of shock. We were just reacting. Couldn't absorb the full kind of impact.
Battalion 9 to command post. Battalion 7 operation call. 849-321.
What I have always done and what I do is photograph, and that's the way I kind of react.
15 to 15 OV.
I knew that this was an important thing, an important event, and it had to be sort of documented. So I went down to do what I always do. It was to photograph. It just so happened that this particular event happened to be basically in my neighborhood, practically. Normally when I photograph these types of things, I'm on a plane flying to Beirut or Iraq or Afghanistan or God knows where. But in this case, it was just a short walk down the street. Ever since meeting the Dalai Lama, I've become interested in Buddhism. I've traveled through many Buddhist countries, practically all the Buddhist countries I've visited and photographed. And I find it very peaceful, very tranquil. Their philosophy or way of living, or the way they practice, is very sensible. I find it's very soothing, and for me, it's probably more compassionate a way of living than any other religion that I can think of. I mean, one thing which I admire about the sort of the Buddhist way of thinking or the Buddhist way of life is sort of a live and let live attitude. If somebody's a man or a woman, if they're Christian or Muslim, or if they're gay or whatever they happen to be, they tend to be accepting of people and whatever they are, which I admire, which I think is absolutely the only way we can really survive on this planet in any kind of civilized way. I met the Dalai Lama on several occasions in New York and LA and India. He's a very kind of down to earth. I've met a lot of religious leaders, but I found the Dalai Lama to be much more down to earth. You really feel that he's right there with you. You don't really feel that he's on some kind of pedestal or that he holds himself up on some high level, and he seems to be right there with you and gives you his undivided attention. I spent so many years in sort of war zones and areas of conflict and places where you were always on guard. You were always never sure what the next day would bring. So I think Buddhism was a kind of a counterpoint to that, working in places like Burma or Cambodia or Sri Lanka and kind of working with the monks in the monasteries. I thought this was a great way to get into a different space and to have a more calming, more contemplative look at myself and the world. I respect them and admire them. And if I was going to be something, I'd probably be a Buddhist. I'm just a photographer.